Hello, my beautiful people. It's your favorite historian, Dr. Catel here. A lot of you have been telling us to do more videos, talk about culture, dive deeper into a particular area of history, or tell the history of other countries. You have been requesting and we have been listening, whilst looking for a way to achieve this. And finally, I believe we have found one. We are working with creators from all over Africa and the diaspora to launch our very own edutainment streaming platform. On this platform, you'll be able to watch courses on the history and politics of various African nations, as well as take a deep dive into the cultures of the different ethnic groups and much more. In order to make this platform a reality, we need your help. If you are a video editor, an animator, or simply interested in doing research and presenting content, get in touch with us. Email us at info@africastory.co. The more of you we have, the more content we can create quickly. It is time we took charge of our own narrative and tell it the way it deserves to be told. Much love. Dr. Catel out. Now, last episode, we discussed how the Interim Government Council, otherwise known as IGC, came about and their attempts to now keep power for longer than necessary, instead of handing over power to Abiola, who had won one of the fairest elections that Nigeria had ever had. This episode, we're going to discuss how Nigeria was plunged back into military rule and how this particular regime became the worst military regime in Nigerian history. So, on the 17th of November 1993, with the country sliding into chaos, Sani Abacha, a military officer in the IGC, dissolved the IGC, pushed Shonekan aside, and declared himself head of state in order to take power. Abacha was initially welcomed by the Nigerian public because they were like, yes, this silly IGC were just trying to hold on to power instead of passing it on like they were supposed to. Some were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Many thought he would restore the June 12 election results. Even Abiola praised him as a man of reason. However, they all soon realized that this one had no intention of passing power on, and he soon became hated. Most felt this was another step backwards into autocratic rule. At first, Abacha took steps that looked like he was here to rise the wrongs of the Babangida regime. He forced many of IBB's closest military advisors into retirement and announced a suspension of SAP measures that had been so painful and devastating to the average Nigerian. However, instead of handing over power, he went on to dissolve all democratic institutions and replace elected governors with military officers. He then went on a campaign to incarcerate or detain any civilian or military officer he considered a threat, and openly warned that no one was above his wrath. He also promised to return Nigeria to civilian rule, but didn't say when. He was probably like, I suppose I need to promise to give up power, but I'm not really going to do it. His refusal to accept the results of June 12 election greatly annoyed UK and USA, and the abrogation of the SAP measures also showed the international community that he was not a trustworthy leader. On the 12th of June 1994, it was the anniversary of the June 12 elections of the previous year. Pro-democracy organizations took to the streets once again in reinvigorated protests and riots. No more military leaders. They wanted elected officials. The civil society, known as the Campaign for Democracy, otherwise known as CD, was there and joined by a new organization called NADECO, which was led by many well-established politicians who were also in support of the June 12 results. M.K.O Abiola declared himself president and held a public inauguration in Lagos. Abacha was like, you want to defy me, Abi? I'll show you. He got Abiola arrested on the 23rd of June, which then led to petroleum workers calling a strike to demand for his release. Other union workers joined in with the strike, bringing economic life in Lagos to a standstill. On the 17th of August 1994, Abacha's government dismissed the leaders of NLC, Nigeria's Labour Congress, and put the unions under government administrators, effectively ending their ability to strike. He started targeting activists and taking them out, and his government carried out multiple human rights abuses. Many other pro-democracy activists fled Nigeria and continued their campaign against Abacha from overseas, like UK, USA, Europe, and other African countries. In 1994, Abacha reintroduced the SAP program again. Abacha had absolute power and committed multiple human rights abuses, including the 1994 SaroWiwa fake trial, in which Saro Wiwa, an author and political activist, was trialed by Ogoni civil disturbance along with 8 others for their alleged role of killing 4 politicians and handed death sentences. Let me give you context of the events. You see, the Niger Delta people for years have argued that even though oil came from their lands, they still lived in poverty and saw little of the wealth. Furthermore, companies that drilled the oil cared very little for the environment, with frequent oil spills threatening their waterways and land, as well as the natural gas polluting the air to dangerous levels. Also, random explosions kept killing innocent bystanders, and sometimes not so innocent bystanders as they tried to tap the oil pipeline. The Ogoni people of Rivers State, around 500,000 people, lived on fishing, which was being messed up by the oil companies. Their territory accounted for half of the oil Nigeria produced annually. The Ogoni people are a small minority in a bigger state, so their living conditions wasn't really improved and no one cared about them. Saro Wiwa and other Ogoni activists claimed existing government policies was similar to genocide of the Ogoni people. After 1993, their demands fell on deaf ears, and the Ogoni Bill of Rights they had presented was ignored by Abacha's government. MOSOP, the movement for the survival of Ogoni people, was able to mobilize protests that turned into riots, and young activists in particular began to promote tactical violence. The violence inevitably disrupted the stability in oil-producing areas and jeopardized the federal revenues, by extension, Abacha's rent-seeking money. Abacha was like, I have to put a stop to this. He used the death of 4 conservative local chiefs as a pretext to arrest Saro Wiwa and other leaders of MOSOP and made them responsible for the murders. The trial was obviously a farce and obviously staged. It was condemned by the international human rights group all around the world. A case on the impartiality of the judges was pending, and the tribunal suppressed important evidence that pointed at the innocence of Saro Wiwa and the other defendants. Despite all of this, it still went ahead and Abacha sentenced 8 of the 9 leaders to death. In early 1995, the government alleged some of the civilians and the military officers were involved in a coup plot. They rounded them up, including former head of state Obasanjo and his former deputy Musa Yar'adua. There was a secret tribunal. Most of them were convicted and death sentences were once again handed out. Obasanjo and Yar'adua were sentenced to imprisonment. On the 1st of October 1995, Abacha announced the timetable for his 3-year transition to civilian rule. On the 10th of November of that same year, Saro Wiwa and his activist friends were all executed. Before he was hanged, his last words were, "Lord, take my soul, but the struggle continues." And those words became a rallying cry for the civil society organizations in their cry to end the tyranny of the Abacha regime. Pro-democracy activists outside Nigeria successfully raised awareness of these unjust killings in the international community, and it cemented Nigeria's position as a pariah, an outcast state in the international community. It showed Abacha's blatant disregard for justice or human rights. Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth of Nations. This, in combination to how the international community was already feeling about Nigeria, had negative consequences on the country's economy. It basically did the opposite of encouraging foreign investment. It created the further divestment of foreign holdings. Honestly, I believe everything declined under Abacha's rule. The economy, oil, foreign investment, exchange, and trade. At one point, oil prices going up looked like it would save Nigeria. But of course, corruption in the government and amongst Abacha and his people meant nothing changed for the normal lives of ordinary Nigerians. Nothing improved. They chopped all the money. Abacha also took the destructive policy of printing excess money and flushing the markets. This sounds like the action of an ignorant child with no idea of how money works. It was probably like, we're running low on money because we've chopped everything. Well then, we will just print more and that will solve it. Of course, it didn't. Money in Nigeria was just over 4 billion naira in 1995, but by 1997, it had risen to 144 billion naira. Can you imagine? This meant an inflation rate of over 150% per year. All it did was plunge Nigeria down even further down an economic sinkhole and devalue the naira even more. Abacha, meanwhile, was loving being in charge. And now that he had got a taste of power, he didn't want to let go. He wanted to remain in power and legitimate his power. But he was hated by everyone, and therefore he could never win a fair election. So what did he do? Well, he decided he would give people the transition to civilian rule that they wanted, but with a twist. In 1996, Abacha allowed Nigeria to split into a further 36 states. This is an effort to build support for his regime and change public opinion about him. He also created 138 new local government areas and allowed 5 political parties to be approved as the 1997 elections were coming up. The local elections took place in December of 1997, but only 10% of Nigerian people turned out to vote. On the 20th of December of the same year, Abacha's government arrested more people on charges of coup plotting, including General Olasupo, 10 officers and 8 civilians. And after another secret tribunal, most of them were sentenced to death. Even though Abacha had allowed 5 political parties to be approved, he didn't allow the parties to represent the public's will. He made sure that all 5 parties nominated him as the presidential candidate through patronage, manipulation, and straight-up intimidation. There was no longer a need for a democratic election. In 1998, the value of Naira went even further down to 90 Naira to the dollar. And in that same year, Abiola died in prison after years of being treated as a criminal at the hands of Abacha's regime. There were massive protests and riots due to his death. During these protests, the Nigerian military killed lots of civilians in an effort to restore order. It was quite a bloody time. On the 8th of June 1998, before Abacha could complete his transition from being a military dictator to becoming the unelected president, he died of an apparent heart attack. The top military officials handed over power to General Abdulsalami Abubakar. Abacha's reign was finally over. During Abacha's time, the federal security system was accused of numerous human rights abuses, including infringements on the freedom of speech, assembly, association, travel, and violence against women. And that's it for this episode. Let's just do a quick recap of what we learned. In this episode, we learned how Sani Abacha became the next coup plotter, and how he took over Nigeria, tried to force it into his own will. He became a dictator and tried to force himself into an unelected president. But he mysteriously got a heart attack and died. That's it for this episode. Guys, as usual, our bibliography is in the description below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, click the notification bell. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, do so. Also, we are launching our own African edutainment streaming service where you can watch more contents like this and you can subscribe and support us to make even more. It is called Africa Story. Go and check it out. Catel loves you. I'm out.